Welcome to the Podcast Cast. I'm Insuling,
And I'm Jarrett.
and today we have a nice little treat for you where we're gonna complain about the world of darkness and morality settings or systems.
Yeah, and by God, do we have a lot to complain about here tonight. This is going to be just a duo recording. Ark is not very familiar with World of Darkness, and as such, wasn't really interested in this one. But regardless, we're still here, and we're going to be talking about it because I have opinions. But gosh darn,
Because we're two guys who have similar opinions on something, and that's why we started a podcast.
it's true. That's exactly why we did it. And this is the thing. So let's start off just telling you a little story, viewers. I have, even as a young kid, I was always a super fan of a video game by the name of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Now, this game is set. This is a video game adaptation of a RPG by White Wolf called Vampire the Masquerade, and it has many editions and hundreds of books for it, and it's part of the general World of Darkness line. And I always loved this strange game because I was a little kid. I had no idea about that wider setting or even the World of Darkness. So I could see that there was something larger at play that I wasn't seeing, and it just absolutely mystified me. I was so excited to learn more about it. And I kind of cooked on that for a few years, got a bit older, and eventually I actually got to read some of the books. And what I ended up finding was that while there is certainly a gem in the World of Darkness brand, there really is. There's wonderful characters, deep setting, tons of interesting plot lines. It's a rough gem. It's a very rough gem. There's a lot of things that either aren't from the outset well made, or things that just aren't designed from a player facing view and are designed from a lore master view. There's a lot of decisions that were made more for what would create the better overall story and less for what would be fun for players at the table. And that kind of scared me away from World of Darkness, to be honest. I didn't want to take the risk of jumping into this weird setting and not having fun. So I didn't. And it wasn't until very recently that I've even touched the setting at all. As we speak, I'm actually doing a campaign, Exalted versus the World of Darkness, which is going to be pretty fun. But it's kind of inspired me a bit to want to talk about World of Darkness in general. And more importantly, all of the things I don't like about it on a personal level, and complain. A lot of complaining.
Oh man, I can definitely see this being like an 8-part series.
It really could be. The thing is, there's a lot to dissect. But let's. I think that sometimes zooming into a hyper laser point and then zooming back out to see the whole can be good for explaining this type of things. So let's just take a single aspect of White Wolf and World of Darkness game design and hyper analyze it. Let's start with the morality system of White Wolf. Now, you would think with a game about being a vampire or a werewolf or a demon that it would be pretty loose with morality systems. It wouldn't try to constrain the player based off of ethics because it's an inherently gothic game. That would be wrong. The World of Darkness uses a very aggressive humanity system, or specifically Vampire does. Every system has its own version, though. But in Vampire, the more humanity you have, the more human traits you can pick up. Like 10 humanity, you can actually go out into the sunlight temporarily and not die. And at 0 humanity, you're basically a literal animal running around. But the thing is, it's really not good design. What these types of systems do, these morality systems, is they tend to restrict player actions in a very artificial way. They tend to force players to do things that their characters wouldn't do because there's a mechanical disadvantage for role-playing a character in a certain way. And it can also lead characters to lose control of their character because, for example, in the vampire games, If your humanity is lower, you can fail to the beast and go berserk temporarily. Which means that if you are playing a more morally loose, evil character, it's possible that randomly your character will just go insane and attack someone for no reason. And there's things that can bring it on, but it can also just happen sometimes. And it leads to a lot of problems.
Yeah, boy, the virtues in the early World of Darkness were what is it? Self control, conscience, and courage. There we go. All right, I still got it. It's been 20 years. So those virtues basically amount to self-control. How well can you control yourself and your beast specifically? Conscience. How good are you at feeling bad about things that you do? And courage. How good are you at not running away from things? But then when you read the charts that show the difficulties of things that might elicit rolls, it's things like, oh, somebody minorly insults your character. Go ahead and make a difficulty 4 roll to not tear their face off. And so, like, that means that you, the player, roll to see if your character decides to do it. And then if they don't decide to do it, then, well, okay, but what if I just want to do that anyway? Like, can I just forego the roll? Well, I mean, you can, but then it's considered an automatic failure on the roll. Why? Why are you doing this? I'm playing a cool vampire. Why can't I just, punch this guy's jaw off? I'm a rad vampire superhero. Come on, let me just do this.
And this type of mechanic really is prevalent in White Wolf. Almost every game has a variation of it. And there's a lot of cases where basically, instead of making a decision based upon what you think your character does, you have to roll dice to see what your character does. And what you think your character would do kind of gets put out the window because you can just roll low on a dice check and apparently your character has absolutely no self-control and just rips someone's throat out because they bullied them slightly. And, that's not fun. Losing control of your... This is like very basic design. Every time you lose control of your character in a game, for any reason, it's not fun. It's never fun. It's never fun to have character control taken away from you when, the rules for this, like it's not just things you do. Like if it was specifically, okay, if you start attacking someone, you might have a chance to not be able to stop attacking them because you get too into what you're doing. But other NPC actions can trigger it. So you don't even have the opportunity to just forgo situations that would cause you to go berserk. You also can be artificially put into them by NPC actions.
You can also have storytellers just decide that things offend your character. Like, I've had it happen a few times where someone's like, oh, somebody was doing something with your girlfriend, so now you're seeing them, so roll self-control. And I'm like, why would I roll self-control? We have an open relationship. And I also like this guy. He's a rad dude. Why would I attack him? My character would not do that. Oh, well, you're a Bruja, and they're more violent. Okay, I will roll at a higher difficulty of 0. So, 2, I guess. Look, I succeeded. Because I'm not mad. I'm just not mad. Why? Please don't take control of my character away from me. And also, please do not tell me what my character finds upsetting. I have that under control, thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff in terms of that. A lot of this tends to trace back, if we're tracking DNA here, a lot of it seems to trace back, oddly enough, to paladins and clerics in D&D. A lot of morality systems seem to stem from mechanics that were created to deal with paladins and stuff. And the problem is that paladins are sort of designed to be hard to play because they're based off of Arthurian fantasy, where ironically the whole point is that everyone kind of sucked in those stories and were horrible people, but that for some reason when people translate that to tabletop, it equates to if your character ever does anything wrong, they lose all their cleric powers for some reason.
Oh yeah.
So
do you remember the time that what is it, Sir Galahad, I think, was like the purest, and that time that he like messed up one time by not giving the guy the kiss that his wife gave him, that or no, the scarf that his wife gave him, that suddenly like, oh, you lost all your powers and all your knighthood, and now you're just a dumb fighter. Also, we're taking your character away from you. Go make a new character. Or
Yeah, it was
or,
like
or go play on your phone for the rest of the session. Because when you take somebody's character away from them, they're probably just gonna play on their phone.
yeah, it's like because this is the thing. A lot of these systems, you need to ask when you're looking at any of these systems, what is the system trying to do? Now, the stated reason for the World of Darkness morality systems is that they're trying to make a game where the whole point is you're balancing the beast and in your humanity. You're trying to stay human when you have every reason to slowly become a monster. But a lot like how Limit in Exalted, and God, we're going back to Exalted now, so every conversation eventually trails back to Exalted. But like in Exalted, there's the limit track. And the narrative idea was that since you're this big dang hero running around, you have to deal with the fact that you're also prone to having faults and slowly being corrupted by your own power. But the problem is, players are very good at doing that by themselves. Like, any player is incredibly competent at becoming corrupt over time. I mean, I've seen the living years. I mean, not the living years. I've seen Princes of the Universe. The players have that on lock. Like, going mad with power, you don't need a system to make people go mad with power. They just do that on their own.
Oh, dude, there's D&D podcasts and like YouTube videos about how do I stop my players from becoming murder hobos. They've got it. They understand it. They understand. We understand corruption and what it is to be drunk on power. We get it. We really don't need a morality system to push us into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we humans have a pretty innate grasp of. And so I don't really see the point of such focused morality systems. I don't see what's trying to be done. Like,
Yeah.
I guess if you had a very, very new player, it might be kind of useful as a roleplay aid. But even then, I'm pretty sure that even like a brand spanking new player is going to have a easy time becoming drunk on their own godhood or vampirehood.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems that I typically see with these morality systems is that it's just all stick and no carrot. Like, if you lose too much humanity, then you face... I know in New World you started to face like a -1 on all social rules for like every humanity below a certain amount. But then like for hunters, like as a hunter, you're kind of just a person, and you're hunting monsters, and you're having to do some pretty dark stuff. And so hunters had this thing called the code, where if you were to lose if you lost a dot of humanity, instead of that, then you could basically replace whatever level you're on with a code, and that typically made you more of a scary dude. But you were able to hunt vampires and stuff because it's things like, oh yeah, my humanity level for this, instead of don't steal things, is now don't let witches live. So I can steal all I want, as I just can't not kill witches. That's my line. But even then, you're still suffering the penalty because every time that you replace something with the code, again, you're suffering from your social pools. And unfortunately, World of Darkness isn't really great for rolling social stuff, which is fine. I give it a pass. Most role-playing games are not good at that. I think you could agree, Jarrett.
Yeah, most role-playing games are combat simulators, basically.
Oh man, are they ever? And it's weird though, because you have this combat simulator where you drop the players in and you say, okay, cool, here's this combat simulator. Try not to interact with it. Go.
Yeah, and it leads to a lot of weird stuff. And this I think is a good place to kind of stretch back up into talking about World of Darkness as a whole. So maybe a little bit of a history about WoD. Now, WoD was originally made in the 90s. It was made during a pretty interesting time for RPGs. There was a lot of crazy stuff that popped up in the 90s in terms of RPG design. And admittedly, for a game made in the 90s, it's not half bad. For its time, the mechanics and rules were actually pretty decent.
I'll give it a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses review here. Like it wasn't bad. Like the storyteller system where you roll 10-sided dice of differing amounts, trying to get certain numbers to add numbers of successes to your or to like. It was a good system for its time. We're gonna say that a
Yeah,
lot. That's gonna be your catchphrase for this
but
this one.
the 90s were like 30 years ago now. Uh, and game design's changed. The nature of what people find interesting in games has changed. It's why games like, well, Fellowship and Godbound are skyrocketing in popularity. And honestly, why, for example, 5e, as much as a lot of people berate it, has gotten to be has won back so much of the community that, let's be honest, quit playing D&D. And a lot of new systems. That means that a lot of the stuff that made World of Darkness games so good is now almost something holding it back. The storyteller system. Let's talk about that just a tad, and then we'll go into the setting as a whole. But the storyteller system in a vacuum is actually pretty interesting. You have your attributes rated 1 to 5, and then you have your skills rated 1 to 5. So if you have like a 5 in strength, so you're really strong, and a 3 and then a 2 in shooting. So I mean, and a 2 in like hammering or something. Then you can add those together and roll 6 dice out, because that's the combination of your 2 skills. And then weapons do stuff and stuff. But it's a system that honestly does, when you first hear it, sound really cool. It definitely, and there is something to be said about the satisfying nature of rolling a ton of dice in a storyteller game. It really does feel good. It's something you miss when you move to like back to D20 style games, is just rolling that bucket of dice out and having all the stuff plop across the table. It's fun. It really is.
I was playing
I
I was playing a doctor in a hunter game, and there was a situation where somebody tried to charge a machine gun nest. They were shot up a lot and took a bunch of aggravated damage because it wrapped around. And I asked if I could try to save them. I just said, hey, I know this is going to be extremely difficult, and if I fail, that's fine, but my character's going to try. He's going to see what he can do. And I remember the storyteller at the time said, okay, but it's going to be a difficulty like 13 roll just because they took so much damage. And I said, hey, that's fine. And my character happened to actually have, 5 dots of, I think it was intelligence and 5 dots of medicine. Like, I went all in on it, because it's tough to get that with a starting character, but I went full bore. And I had some gear too, and then I had another thing that gave me rote, because my character had the, what was it? Like, you could have a job as a background in that system, and having a job meant that you basically pick 1 or 2 skills, and I think they were called abilities, but you'd pick like 2 abilities, and then if you use those for your job, then you get bonuses on them. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm a doctor. That's my thing. I got rote, so any dice that I fail, I get to re-roll. So I rolled, and I got like 15 successes. And I felt amazing, because the storyteller system, in World of Darkness at least, is like rolling 5 is actually pretty impressive. So rolling above 10, like I was like, man, I feel like a champion now. This is great. So there's a good story for it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fun stuff. There's also a lot of bad stuff. At the end of the day, the storyteller system is a train wreck. It is a broken, messy train wreck. And we've just spent some time singing the praises of the storyteller system, and mind, there's people who play the storyteller system as their main system, love it. So you definitely can enjoy the storyteller system. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is the storyteller system has a lot of idiosyncrasies that need to be addressed. First of all, dexterity is the best stat. Every character you make, have them have dexterity 5 if you can. If you want to make a character who does combat at all, give them dexterity 5. Because, like, attributes are arrayed into 3 groups. Your social skills, your like mental skills, and your physical skills. In the physical skills, generally, strength is useless in combat for the most part. Stamina, while kind of useful, is also nothing. And then dexterity is the most useful power. Why? Because every weapon in the game relies on dexterity for its roll. It doesn't matter if you're shooting someone or hitting them with a hammer, you're rolling dexterity to see if you can impact them and to see how much damage you're dealing. Though melee weapons do get a bonus for your strength, but it's not nearly as impactful as your dexterity. And this means in every single White Wolf game, the best thing you can do, the absolute best thing, is to get dexterity 5.
Yeah, Dex 5 is just the thing that you do. I actually used to have people asking me why I wasn't. They'd say, "Why are you buying your strength to 4?" And I'd say, "Well, I just want to play a strong guy." And they would just say, like, "No, don't do that. Just drop your strength to 2, drop your stamina to 2, put your put your dex at 5." And the only reason that you're putting strength and strength and stamina at 2 is so the storyteller doesn't look at you funny because you took physical as your tertiary and just took 2 1s in your attributes, because it's cheaper to do that. Because, oh boy, do these games ever charge you for buying more powerful things. Now, earlier I mentioned my doctor who had intelligence 5 and medicine 5, which I started with, even though it's very expensive. And the reason for that is because doing that in character is even more expensive. Because in Old World of Darkness, things cost your current rating times a certain number. Either times 2, or I think for attributes it's times 4 to buy the next dot. In New World of Darkness, it's the next dot times a number. So, oh boy, you want to buy your ability from 4 to 5? Well, that's going to be, 5, 10, 15 XP? Oh, you didn't start with it at 4, you started with it at 3? Okay, well, now you have to pay 12 XP, and then 15 XP. Which means that you're spending several sessions, I think you're still only getting, 3 XP per session. So enjoy spending 4 sessions not buying anything just because you want that 4th dot.
Yeah, see, this is something that a lot of these games have. They have what's called freebie points at the end of character creation that you can use to buy stuff. However, generally the freebie points are much cheaper when buying attributes and skills and stuff than with normal experience. What this ends up meaning is that it's always mathematically better to start with the stuff that you need at max, because buying it in play, like having your character slowly get stronger and better, is mathematically horrible and way more costly. This was something actually, and I'm using Exalted again because it was an experience I had, but Exalted is basically a variation of the storyteller system. They're so similar as to be the same system, honestly.
It's the same system.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So,
we could say it.
Yeah, it's the same system.
It's not even an insult. It just is the same system. It's okay. We're not being snide here.
I made a character. His name was Batu Caden. He was a solar Dawncast, gonna be this cool character. And I figured I knew that strength was important. I mean, I knew that dex was important, but I gave him a 3 in dex and a 5 in strength because I wanted his main trait to be how strong he was. And I remember submitting him to one of the Exalted Discords. I'm like, yeah, I'm new to this game. Here's this character sheet. And the first thing someone told me is, hey, you need to make sure your dexterity is 5. Like, straight up, just that's the first thing. Like, because I asked for, what is this done right? And he's like, no, the dex needs to be 5.
Yeah,
And mind, he was really polite about it. Don't get me wrong. Like, the guy wasn't being rude. He's just like, yeah, the game wants you to have it at 5.
Yeah, and like you might say like, oh well, why would I do that? But then you look at the NPCs, and a lot of them also have combat stats. So anytime I would hear a storyteller complain about people min-maxing their characters, I'd say, well, then why do the NPCs all do it? Heck, look at Scion. Scion's NPCs are all just stacked. Because it makes sense to you. Hey, what is your character's job? Be good at that. That's the thing that I tell people for every system. Like, just, what do you want your character to do? What do you want to be excited about people saying, oh boy, I sure wish that we had X around? And you can then stand up and proudly say, I'm a doctor, or I'm a locksmith, because you're good at that. Everything else is secondary. Heck, everything else is tertiary. And that's just how role-playing games tend to work. Unless you're playing with, like, only two player characters, in which case you do have to spread out a little bit. But if you're with 3 or more, specialize, hyper-specialize, do it. And storyteller systems really do reward you for doing it and punish you for not. And it's that second part that sucks. Because with the tiny amount of points that they give, you're effectively playing characters that are just... I'm trying to think of a polite way to say it. They're barely functioning adults. They're good at, like, one thing, but they can't drive, they can't work their phones, they don't know what math is. Like, they get confused when they see a number with a line and another number, because they don't know what fractions are, because you didn't have enough points to put into academics. Not to mention the secondary skills that storytellers will just randomly pull out and be like, well, I see you have academics, but this is really more of a mathematics role, and that's a secondary skill. Ugh. Just let people roll academics. Alright, I'm going to back away from that ledge. I have an academics pet peeve. Just around that skill.
Oh, God.
Because it's your general knowledge skill. It's your... Like, this isn't this isn't specifically science or computers or politics. It's just like, hey, what's, like, math or, like, anything else? Yeah, it's academics. There you go.
You're the smart guy who knows things. That when you take that skill, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and, like, or they'll say, oh, well, I see you taking academics level 3, but you don't have in your story, or in your backstory, that you have a degree. See, here in the book it says that academics 3 means that you have a degree. And I'm saying, well, yeah, but unfortunately the game is only giving me 4 dots of knowledges. And I don't really want to buy the other ones. I just want to buy my academics for my character concept. But it doesn't make sense to have a master's degree if I don't know how to use a computer to do my online classes and homework and studying.
There's a lot of stuff. There's also the fact that, and this is something that Insuling just touched on here, but the game's built with the idea that if you don't put points in something, you're an idiot in that subject. Like, if you don't expressly take driving, your character doesn't know how to drive.
You take
like,
a penalty.
You have to at least take 8 points. This was something in... Same thing. This was something that happened in Exalted. If your character doesn't take Lore 1, they can't read. Now mind, this is hilarious, because it means that the Emperor Palpatine equivalent character in Exalted actually can't read. But it also doesn't work very well in games. Like, it just... I think that characters, unless they are choosing to have their character have a weak area intentionally, should be assumed to just have the average person's level of skill and experience in things.
The Emperor Palpatine thing is pretty great. He's mentioning in 2nd edition, they did a copy and paste from 1st edition to show the stats for the Mask of Winters, but they used the First and Forsaken Lion's stats. Now, Mask of Winters is supposed to be Emperor Palpatine. He's this creepy guy with robes and, I don't know, tells you about his fully armed and operational walking castle. But the stats that they pulled it from, didn't have any lore. Which means that the First and Forsaken Lion, the guy that's supposed to be Sauron from Lord of the Rings, also couldn't read. What? Like, because people will joke about it, or people, not a joke about it, they'll be like, oh yeah, that was just a copy and paste of the First and Forsaken Lion. Are you telling me that Sauron can't read? Sauron, the guy who made the One Ring, with words in it. There's writing in that ring. I don't think he's just doing it from memory, guys.
Oh God. See, but that is some of the stuff that happens in WoD. You have a lot of characters, like this assumption that your character is a barely functioning, like, if you don't have dots in something, the assumption made by the game is that your character is so incompetent that they would drown in their own cereal in the morning if it wasn't for a harness.
You're not even wrong. Some of the descriptions for their abilities are exactly like that. Like, oh, melee 1, you know the what side of the sword is the pointy end. My dude, I watched Three Ninjas. I know how a sword is used. I don't know how to use it, but I could swing it around. I know the pointy end. I do not have any points in melee.
Yeah, it's really strange, and there's a bunch of like weird edge cases in the storyteller system. Like, almost every game has really easy ways to make a demigod character. Like in Hunter, it wasn't too hard to make a character that could just like let out 20 shots around with non-automatic weapons.
Oh yeah, you could what was it? You could like fan a pistol and just do that. You could do my build, which was to use whirlwind attack and a halberd, which could be used with quarterstaff style, to do a whirlwind attack and kill almost an entire pack of werewolves from full health to 0 health. Boom.
No. Oh God, that is wonderful.
Every werewolf around me takes
See,
14 damage. Eat it.
Oof. Oh God, that's wonderful. And see, and that's the type of thing though that you see a lot in this system is really easy ways to break the system in half. Also, every system like condescends to the player and tells them that they're bad if they do that, while also designing NPCs to be so powerful that you feel like you're not doing it right if you don't also kind of do that. So, I think that we have talked about the setting itself quite a bit. I mean, the system. What should be talked about now, perhaps, is the setting itself, the setting of WoD. So, from the outlet, the World of Darkness is basically Gothic horror. The idea is it was modern Gothic horror. So the art was like set up, so it's like the modern day, a la the 90s, but like everyone had trench coats and there was a lot of dark and rain and the buildings were more Gothic for some reason. Because again, Gothic horror. There's werewolves and vampires, very traditional, very cool. All of this stuff's happening, but basically with every passing year, more and more baggage got put on. Like, for example, when they released Exalted, they came up with the idea that Exalted is actually the prehistory of World of Darkness. So they started adding a lot of little lore tidbits all across the setting that are supposed to point towards the World of Dark, like Exalted as a setting. So like the Hunters were originally designed as obvious Solars. There was hints about like there was just like all of these little nods and winks and like names popping up back and forth in weird ways, and a lot of the times it ended up being World of Darkness that got the short end of the stick narratively. There was a lot of stuff that was introduced that just didn't help the World of Darkness as a whole, and there was a lot of design decisions that pushed it away from Gothic horror.
Yeah, God, I hate the idea of Exalted being the prehistory to World of Darkness, even though I know that that was the original idea, because they didn't stick with it. Like they just could not stick the landing, and that's something that you'll see in a lot of in World of Darkness writing is they cannot stick landings. Apparently, they have a Holocaust book that's very well written, but I refuse to believe it because I will never read that book because I know that if I pick it up, it'll just be a horrible joke. But so far, everybody who's read it has told me that it's true, that it's very tasteful, handles the whole matter very well, very cleanly, but I cannot believe it because I've read other materials from them, and oh boy, do they just drop everything.
Yeah, they a lot of times have a lot of trouble with nuance and creating complex narratives, so they tend to go for very simple, broad strokes. Like something you'll find in the vampire books is that vampires did everything. The moon landing, there was probably a vampire who organized it. Every world war ever, probably a vampire handling, except for World War II. That no one had anything to do with World War II. But that was the only point in history that vampires weren't connected directly with.
Yeah, I
We,
think that
we,
I think that that might be one of the big things about their Holocaust book was the fact that they didn't take the actions, like the real life actions that humans actually did, because again, Holocaust really happened to people. If you don't believe in it, I please get help. Um, but it was a thing where every other supernatural thing that used to pride itself on being the monster in the shadows and oh yeah, humans are our food. They saw World War II happen and they all took a collective oh things have changed. Things have gotten different now. Like everybody had to take a hard tack in another direction because they could no longer do what they were doing. Because now people have machine guns and we dropped the atomic bombs and now all the supernaturals are going, oh, humans are terrifying now. Well, all right, what do we do with that? Well, let's make a gothic horror setting, guys. We're gonna
yeah, there's
we're gonna hide in the shadows and pretend that we're Prince Shizor from whatever that one book was.
yeah, and it leads to a lot of kind of weird stuff that pops up. Like, for example, they want to give the idea that there's this big conspiracy to keep supernatural stuff under wraps. And though in play, what it ends up meaning is that if you do anything cool, the fun police will come and kill you. Like, if you're a vampire and you go on live TV and grab a news anchor and throw him across the room and eat him, it won't be the government that stops you. Like the natural result of your actions or something. No, instead, what'll happen is a bunch of other vampires who are higher level than you will show up and kill you, and then probably eat you.
Oh yeah, that happens. You broke the masquerade, and unfortunately, the fact that the masquerade hasn't been broken yet means that if you break it, that it's all your fault because somehow it just hasn't been broken. They talk about the veil, especially with werewolves. Oh boy, werewolves. We'll get to them in a minute, but werewolves have a thing called, I think, the veil, where people who see the werewolves convince themselves that they aren't really looking at werewolves. Which basically means that werewolves, the little golden children of World of Darkness, I hate werewolves, but they get to do whatever they want. And people will kind of freak out, but there's no masquerade for them because, oh no, that wasn't a werewolf. That was a guy in a bear costume with a chainsaw. Yeah, that's what I saw. Vampires don't have that though. So you're on your own. if somebody happens to have a smartphone, which they always do, oh boy. If you're gonna play vampires, just play in the 80s. It's more fun that way.
Yeah, it's like the problem is as we get into like a more modern world and stuff, you run into the issue that it's like in the 80s or the 90s or even the early 2000s, like 2004 ish areas, you can get away with like people not having cell phones, and so you can do certain crazy stuff in places where they can't like have a landline to call the police. But now, like, if you do anything, they're just gonna dial 911, and then the police are coming, and that's a masquerade violation. Because what are you gonna do? Kill that person? Then that creates a missing persons case. And if enough of those pop up, that indicates that something weird is going on, which also makes it a masquerade violation. And it creates the situation where, honestly, even if there's only like 5 vampires in every major city or something incredibly small like that, there is no way that people haven't just constantly because the second like any group of people finds out that there might be vampires and there's actual evidence for it, um, the internet would explode. Like people would just start seeking them out to figure out the mystery. And we've seen how the internet solves mysteries. It is painfully effective at that, if anything. And there's no way, like, there's no good excuse to allow vampires to keep being vampires in the modern world. Like, unless they have a veil like magic that keeps humans from noticing them like werewolves do, it doesn't make sense. Like, there are explanations. Like, one explanation is that apparently Nosferatu are super hackers that are better than any human hacker somehow.
They certainly don't have any powers to make it
And
happen. They just
yeah,
are.
this is something weird that comes up. See, vampires, they don't actually have like excellencies like in Exalted. They can't just become superhuman at a skill. And Nosferatu don't actually have any ways to get stronger at computers. And given how, you know, short computers, like, if computers have been around for a few hundred years, you could just say, well, they've had a few hundred years of practice, so they're probably better than someone who's just had 12. But there are people alive today that were alive before computers existed, or computers existed in the way that we view them now. Like, there's people now that have been coding since computers have been available. So why are they so good at it? Because this is the thing, like, the Nosferatu communications network is so good that no human hacker can touch it, and it's an internet that operates directly on top of the normal internet, and no one has found them ever. And they're so good that whenever someone, like, tries to post a video of a vampire, it just disappears. They're that, like, 1984 competency on the internet. But at the same time, like, but doesn't that mean that everything you do they know about if they're that hyper competent? But, like, they use that as an explanation for why tech doesn't completely undermine everything, but they also don't think about the ramifications of what happens when a single faction has such a comically overwhelming information advantage.
Yeah, it's rough, and it just gets worse the more you think about it. I can give it a little bit of a I don't want to say a pass, but it's the notion that, yeah, the more you pick at it, the bigger the plot holes get, and so at a certain point you just have to say, hey, do you want to play the game or not? But unfortunately, they did really jump into it and try to just go on and on and on about how great these people are at X, Y, and Z, and then the rules don't really match the fluff. They don't, like, can my character be this good at hacking? Oh no. Well, okay, but if the Nosferatu are only awake, half the time, do they take turns just sitting at the computer? I don't know, as admins on Facebook or something? Like, is that what they're doing? And then what happens?
Yeah,
What happens when somebody makes a new social network that they don't control? Like, what happens when what happens when people leave MySpace to go to Facebook? Or what happens when Google says, "Hey, I'm making a new one," and then people start posting vampire stuff on that? How are they taking those down?
like, do they just have control of literally everything? Like, do they just control every company somehow?
Like, there's the technocracy, which are these mages and people who work with them that are all about being 1984 to varying degrees. And, they could have something kind of like that. Like, oh yeah, we just put a spirit into the internet. And, I don't know, the internet might be a spirit. Oh, also, nobody knows who made the internet, but everybody wants to take credit for it. That's another weird fact. Like, I would really think that the internet would be something that somebody would know where it came from. But, they didn't want to hand that to anybody. Al Gore did it. It was Al Gore. Right? Was it Al Gore? Was he the guy who said that he had a big hand in inventing the internet? Oh boy, I can't remember now.
It was someone.
Look it up on YouTube. I'm sure you'll find it. Somebody's probably posted that video. I had a great hand in inventing the internet. Yeah, that clip. Oh boy. Unfortunately, you don't get that in World of Darkness. So nobody knows who made this internet, but oh boy, can everybody keep all of the supernatural things off of it immediately. Always.
Yeah, it's It's kind of crazy. Also, so another thing. So World of Darkness does kind of a loosey-goosey system where it could be that every different, like, because there's different splats. There's like a game called Vampire the Masquerade set in the World of Darkness that's about playing vampires. Then there's Werewolf the Apocalypse that's about playing werewolves. But it kind of is a bit loose if the Vampire the Masquerade werewolves are the same werewolves that you're playing in Werewolf the Apocalypse, and if the Werewolf the Apocalypse vampires are the same vampires you play in Vampire the Masquerade. And what it does is it means that if you try and figure out how all of these different supernatural groups are interacting, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, okay, there's the mages. They can do anything, literally anything. And if you factor the ones with archspheres, they can literally do anything. So there's those groups, one of the main factions of which doesn't believe that the supernatural exists and wants to destroy it before it breaks reality. So that exists. Then there's the vampires, who are just this weird collection of, like, this ancient society that's ruled by people that have been alive for thousands of years, and they're kind of doing their own thing. And then there's the worm, which is sort of the vampires and sort of this thing called Pentex, and they want to destroy the they want to, like, destroy the environment, which the werewolves don't like, I think. This
Okay,
actually brings us
okay.
up to the werewolves.
Okay. So the worm is the idea of destruction, because originally you had the wild, the weaver, and the worm, where the wild was creation, the weaver would, weave things out of the wild, and then the worm would destroy the things that the weaver made. And then they trapped the worm somehow, and then the worm went crazy, and I think the wild is dead, and now the worm is loose, but basically everything that's evil, or everything that's not werewolves, is of the worm. And now we get to what werewolves are.
So, could I do the explanation of werewolves, or would you like to?
Yeah, go ahead, have fun.
Okay. So, here's my best explanation of werewolves. Imagine if you took an eco-terrorist, then, like, went onto Google and typed in, like, Indian legends, and found the first shape-shifting legend you could find, probably going to be Wendigos, and just kind of went, this all probably fits together, and then you just throw it into a pot, and you don't really think about how the elements you're making mix together, and then you're like, who should they fight? I guess. Yeah, that sounds good. And so that's just what it is. Like, the werewolves are magic Native American superheroes who are also skinwalkers, kind of, maybe, sort of.
They're skinwalkers who can talk to spirits, jump into the spirit realm, um, where they hunt spirits to get power, maybe? Because they have to go on hunts. Only werewolves are around in the modern day. They definitely have rules for things like where dinosaurs, where dragons, where bears, where crows, but you're not allowed to play those. Those are all dead. You have to play those in the Dark Age books. So, you're a werewolf. What does that mean? Take a bunch of more or less racist Native American stereotypes and just throw that in there. You're all about nature, unless you're a glasswalker, in which case you're still all about nature, but, in cities. And every vampire's worst nightmare. All your damage is aggravated. You heal like crazy. I think like all your lethal becomes bashing damage or something ridiculous. It's extremely hard to die as a werewolf or lose because they're incredibly broken. And so I can see why some people would enjoy playing them in a World of Darkness game, because oh boy, can you just steamroll through everything. But they're just so bad. There's just so much nonsense with them that
There's so much stuff that doesn't work. Like, okay, here's an example. What's the main What's would you say, Insuling, is the main appeal of playing a werewolf? The one thing that someone who plays a werewolf wants to do.
Bone other werewolves.
Turn in. Oh God, we need to talk about that. Okay,
Yeah, yeah. That
so
now you
the
might think
werewolf.
you might think that I'm joking, and I am joking because ew. But I'm actually curious if you know about this, about where I'm going with this.
Okay, the werewolf series is very weird about who your character is screwing and what happens when they have kids. There's a lot of like really specific write-ups for how the genealogy is supposed to work. Like, okay, first rule, two werewolves can't have kids because then the kid will be like a super werewolf who's always in his big werewolf swole form, and that's his natural form, and that's bad or something. And also I forget, was this back when they could also like turn into a dog and screw other dogs too?
Oh yeah, totally.
Oh yeah. See, and so it had like what happens when you do that, and you know, just like every like basically everything on the sliding scale from dog to person and werewolf in the middle, it had a list of what happens when you have kids with them. Like a really specific list.
Yeah, so you're not allowed to love other werewolves if you are a werewolf. I mean, you could love, but boy, does that relationship have to be super ace because you're not allowed to have children with them. Because if you do, then your pack will kill you, punish you, you'll lose honor. I mean, from what I understand, loss of honor is basically character death because that's where you get your power from. But oh boy, your kid is definitely not long for the world. Unless they are, in which case you become a super rad future player character, but you're not allowed to play those. Maybe you are. I actually don't know. I, boy, do I not know a lot about werewolf, but I've heard a lot from people who love werewolf, and it sounds an awful lot like what I hear from people who do not like werewolf. Which is why I get confused why people love werewolf so much, because it all sounds so bad, but people get so excited while they're
I
telling me things that just sound bad. I'm like, this just
the
sounds like a train wreck.
the big appeal of werewolf is, and this is something that we're about to touch on, but looping it into werewolf here. The big appeal is the World of Darkness is a game where you don't have power and agency as a whole, and playing a werewolf gives your character tons of power and agency.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying, vampires. Oh, you can travel to the astral realm if you have the max level of one of your disciplines, which is what they call vampire powers. But oh boy, if you do that, it's extremely dangerous and this and that. Okay, well, what about werewolves? Oh, they could just do it. They just hop across the veil. It's fine. They just do it all the time. You just get a mirror or something, and you can take a little hop over there. You can talk to spirits. You can go to all these rad realms and stuff. Like you can do all kinds of cool stuff as a werewolf, which is why it's almost worth playing. But then you have to be a werewolf.
Yep. And this is another thing, and this is the saddest thing is that up until very recently in the rules, actually, because you as a werewolf have various forms. You have your human form, and then like a wolfman form, then a full werewolf form, then a really big wolf form, then a normal wolf form. But the thing is, ironically, the full werewolf form, like your big scary werewolf monster form that's supposed to be like horrifying and the most powerful, actually was weaker than your wolfman form up until fairly recently. Because of the way that math worked, it was just like way less effective than just using other powers, which kind of kills some of the fun of being a scary werewolf.
Mm-hmm. It's just so frustrating when you're like, yeah, I'm gonna play this rad werewolf, and I'm gonna do rad werewolf things. All right, well, we're gonna get together, and then we're gonna go hunt a spider. Wait, what? Why are we hunting a spider? Well, we need to get honor. Why? I just want to keep my trailer park safe, because the trailer park is as close to the city as I'm allowed to live, because if I go any closer to the city, then, I don't know, people discourage it? Come on, guys. Why are we out here? Why are we in the middle of a desert, having powwows? Let's let's go do something. We're in World of Darkness in werewolf costumes. Let's go be rad. No, no, no. We have to wait 20 years for Holden to come up with Exalted versus World of Darkness. Then you can be rad.
Oh God. Now, what Insuling just brought up is actually, I'd argue, the most core problem with the setting. In every version, the idea is you're cursed with being a superhero and you're supposed to feel sad about it. That this shows up in literally every game. Like in Vampire the Masquerade, it's but are you still human? Oh, with Werewolf the Apocalypse, it's like, oh well, you're this big monster now. You're scary. You don't have control fully anymore. You're angry now. You have anger issues. With like every other game has a variation of this, but for some reason they forget that having superpowers is fun. Like, I think that this is something that people forget. In real life, I want superpowers. Like, being a vampire doesn't actually sound like that bad of a rap, all things considered. Like, okay, so God cursed Cain, and it's like, okay, with superpowers. Yeah, okay, that really high. This must be a really high level curse right here, because I'm not seeing the downsides. Oh, he can't go out in the sun. Oh, good for him. That sounds like a minor inconvenience rather than like a curse.
I already tried my hardest not to go out in the sun. Now, are you telling me that I'm doomed to an existence of blackout curtains and rad superpowers? Oh no. It sounds to me like you've cursed me to be everybody else's problem.
Yeah, it's like, and they don't expect players to have this reaction. Like, because here's an example. There's Changeling. Changeling's actually my favorite World of Darkness game, mechanically speaking. The whole idea is you're someone who was kidnapped by the True Fae and managed to escape, but your time in their weird Fae world changed you. So now you're not a person fully anymore. You're not also a Fae either. You're some weird subsidiary entity that no one understands. And there's the possibility that the thing that, kidnapped you the first time might be coming back for you. So a lot of cool stuff there. And also everyone has superpowers, these rad glamour abilities that let them, be a monster from myth. Like, you can have rad antlers and gore people to death. So the question I asked is, when I can be a shadow person and turn into shadows and run along walls at 80 miles an hour, I mean, it sucks. But that sounds fun. That sounds cool. Like, but no one in these shows ever seems to enjoy how cool they are. No one in these books ever seems to have fun with their abilities at all.
Yeah, they're focused with the foisted upon sadness of like, you've returned, and you can see that your family now has a thing that looks exactly like you, that has taken your place. Oh, isn't this upsetting? And like, yeah, that's upsetting, but like, I can throw cars. I can do a lot of stuff. This is super cool. I'll worry about my family stuff later. I'm gonna spend this game just being a superhero. I'm gonna go stop crime. I'm going to be the Punisher, but with superpowers. That is what I'm going to be doing. Thank you very much, and good night.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff like that, and it's like the same thing with like the werewolves. Well, you're this cool werewolf, but you have this weird werewolf society to interact with, and you also have the worm, which is ending the world. Oh God, we haven't talked about that yet.
I don't want to talk about that tonight. That's a big thing.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to deal with the Holocaust, or not the Holocaust. The Armageddon, the end, just the ends of the world. I get enough of that in real life.
Yeah, let's make this quick then. So World of Darkness, much like Exalted, has, I'm not going to say a fetish, but a fixation on ending the world. Every book has multiple ways that the world is going to end. And by some interpretations, all of those different end-of-the-world methods are going to happen at the same time, apparently. the Fae invade. Cain comes back. The antediluvians come back.
The player
Auto-
character, or the players all decide that they would rather stay home with their families and play your stupid game.
it really it's kind of wild. The whole game just kind of progresses like that, and it just that dang meta plot keeps on a trucking. I mean, like in Vampire the Masquerade, it's so bad that vampires just as a whole refer to the world as these final nights. Like whenever they're talking about the state of things, like the way things are going right now, they say, "Oh yes, things are dark these final nights," because the world's ending, and everyone knows it's ending.
Yeah, it's not great because when I'm playing a game where my character is immortal, the last thing that I want to know is that my character who is immortal but has only been so for a couple months and is just some peon nobody that is just like everybody is their boss. Oh, the world's gonna end soon, and so everybody is still my boss. I'm never going to amount to anything. Again, I would rather just stay home with my awesome wife than come here and play this. This is not my jam.
Yeah,
I have a job. I don't need to come and roleplay having a job. Because
and,
my real job is one that I actually enjoy and it pays me currency.
yeah, and the thing is that there's ways to get around this plot line. Like here's an example. This was something that Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines did. Again, great game. Play it. Just play it. But what it did was the whole thing is setting up. Oh, the world's probably ending because there's this sarcophagus that has an antediluvian in it. Ooh, spooky, and not just. Oh God, I don't want to spoil things.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
Wait, it was made in 2004. Are we past the point where we're allowed to spoil things? Is 2004 old enough that if you haven't seen it by now, it doesn't count?
Can we agree that we'll basically tell the story and then wrap it up?
Yeah.
All right, listener, if you don't want the ending of Bloodlines to be spoiled for you, then this is the podcast cast. I'm Insuling.
I'm Jarrett.
All right. You've heard the ending. I guess we're gonna do our first spoiler here. Spoiler alert, everyone! It's happening.
Okay. So, all throughout the game, you're basically playing the part of the pawn. Intentionally so. It's part of the game design. And everyone is using you. You're everyone's minion. Even the people that pretend to be your allies are doing it for their own political benefit. And this sarcophagus looms above you. Apparently, it's a foreteller of the end of the world and stuff. And so you play through the game, and slowly you start to become more powerful. And through game logic, you're able to become stronger way faster than you ever can in the RPG itself. So you become strong enough to actually start opposing some of the elders in your society directly, like by killing them. And by God, you do that. You kill a ton of people, a ton of elders too. Like, oh God, is it a bloodbath? And at the very end, you basically, in one ending, shank your boss in the neck and leave him alone with the sarcophagus, which he opens, intending to either start the end of the world or gain the power of a super low generation vampire. And when he does that, it was just a dead guy, and then he blows up because there was bombs in it because gangrels or brujas. I'm sorry. Yeah, but the whole point is there was never any ancient person in the coach. The whole thing was basically a meme. Cain shows up at the end to make fun of people. It's a fun time. It really is.
I think that World of Darkness is best when it laughs at itself a little bit. Like,
Yeah,
when it's like, it builds up this whole thing of like, the world will end. Oh, look, the red stars in the sky, this and that. And then it turns out, like, yeah, that red star, it faded away. It was just a supernova, guys. We know what supernovas are. Why are you all getting so freaked out? But of course, vampires who still probably don't understand germ theory because they're all 8 or more 100 years old, see a red star and they're like, oh man, that's that's enough importance for like a million comets. And you, as a younger vampire who knows science, there's like, I don't, sure, okay. And I think it's super great when like you play through it and then it turns out all these portents really are just nothing because it's just a comet.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happens in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. You find out that even if the world might still be ending, maybe, but people really are just going to attribute everything to the world ending. Like, there's these things called Thin Bloods, which people are associating with the end of the world. But if you talk to certain people in the game, they point out that that's kind of dumb. Like every single new generation of vampires past like the 8th generation has had all of the older vampires saying that that generation is weak-blooded and therefore the end of the world.
Yep.
Like it's this whole thing. But here's the thing, and this is when World of Darkness is at its best. Just enough of the portents actually matter that it doesn't just become like, because you kind of have to have a fine balance. If you take yourself too seriously, it turns into an edge fest. But if you don't take yourself seriously at all, why care about it at all? You kind of have to balance it, and I think that World of Darkness can every once in a while manage it, but it is every once in a while, and most of the time they are way too self-serious in their stories.
Yeah. So, and I do want to kind of punctuate this by saying that you're not a bad person if you play World of Darkness. You're not a bad person if you run World of Darkness. I played in it a lot. I had fun, even though, looking back, I can see now with hindsight that it wasn't great. But it's fine. Do what you want. Do what makes you happy. Just, give other systems a try. What's the worst that can happen? You go back to something you love? Sure. Sounds great.
Oh, God. So, now I believe, Insuling, you have a little story to tell about some of your experiences in World of Darkness.
I think I might push that back to our next video or our next recording.
Okay.
I think we have a pretty good thing here.
Yeah, I think we do too.
Yeah, we're at the solid hour mark.
That sounds awesome. So, should we record the outro?
Yeah, we can do the outro again. I'm sure our listeners love to hear it. So this has been the Podcast Cast. I'm Minceling.
And I'm Jarrett.
And we're signing off.